When it comes to the earliest of Macintosh games, it's always interesting to see how different developers utilized the mouse. The Macintosh was all about the mouse. It was one of the most notable features of the computer, and not a common thing to see back then. Some developers would use the mouse to great effect, integrating the mouse in such an effective way that it felt natural and gave the player great control. And while this wasn't always the case, most developers would attempt to integrate it in their games. An early example of this is the game Cap'n Magneto by Al Evans, which was one of the first adventure games ever to do away with typing in commands on the keyboard.
Don't kill yourself.
Cap'n Magneto was originally released on the short-lived Apple II computer. This version was released in 1983 and was entirely keyboard controlled. Only a couple years later, in 1985, it was remade and re-released for the original Macintosh, and this time featured point-and-click controls. This is one of the earliest examples of an adventure game that is entirely controlled with the mouse.
Humanoid caca.
And while it doesn't always seem practical in this game, it can be awkward. Most adventure games of this era were text-based, requiring you to type in which direction you want to move and figure out which commands the game would understand. A goal of this game was to do away with that. You play as Captain Lance Magneto, an intergalactic ranger who's been assigned to investigate the disappearance of several commercial trading ships in the vicinity of Rigel 4. These disappearances have been linked to a creature that goes by Menturg, who's hiding out on a small planet nearby. The Crown of Control, which is a powerful relic, has recently disappeared and has been traced to the Menturg. It's believed that the Menturg is using the crown to commit piracy in high space. When Magneto got close to the planet, the ship got caught in a force field and sucked down to the surface. Fortunately, Magneto survived this crash landing. Unfortunately, all of his equipment got scattered around the planet, some which was taken by creatures that inhabit this world. Even your ship was stolen. So the goal of Cap'n Magneto is to find your equipment, destroy Menturg, then find and repair your ship and get out of there. The world of Cap'n Magneto is filled with all sorts of creatures, all of which have arbitrary temperaments. Some are brave, some are scared, some are mad when you meet them, some are friendly and they give you tips and help you fight other monsters.
You gotta look around.
There's a nice variety of both enemies and behaviors here, which really gives personality to this world.
Yummy electrons.
As far as the gameplay goes, it's pretty much your standard adventure game style. You search for items, then use those items to solve puzzles and get further into the game. Nothing is incredibly cryptic, but there is a lot of trial and error and exploring you'll have to go through to figure out some of these puzzles. The friendlies will give you hints. That is, if you're able to find your tricorder, so you can understand what they're saying. The game world as a whole is pretty small. It's just a few full-size screen links in every direction before it loops around and you're back where you started. There's a river that blocks the horizontal plane, and initially the only way to get over the river is to use this bridge, but there's a powerful enemy guarding it. A dorse, or I call him a dork, and he's blocking the path. You won't be able to kill these guys right away, so it's best to stay away from the bridge until you've got some of your better equipment back. If you go left, you'll run into the castle. This is where the Menturg is, and this has got to be the only game that I know of where you can immediately run up and fight the main boss. Of course, you stand no chance and will get immediately trashed, but it's still interesting. When you get near the castle, the Menturg will pull you towards it, which was always creepy when I used to play this as a kid. I only beat this guy once back then, so I knew that if he got near me, I was dead. Another thing that creeped me out back then were these tornadoes. If you step on an invisible area, mostly by the castle, you'll trigger one of these tornadoes. They'll take you in random directions and drop you off on a random spot on the map. If you're wearing any armor at the time, the tornado strips this off of you. There are a number of items to find and use in this game. Weapons, armor, the tricorder, the magical nothing, and even baubles.
Oh boy, baubles.
You've got to trade these baubles to the guard for keys.
It's so unusual to meet a truly great hero. Here, take this key.
But watch out for the Cypids. They're all a bunch of liars that'll suck you dry. Of your life, that is. They take away your health. That's what I mean.
I am high on your life.
This game is controlled with the mouse, or originally it was, and I always had trouble moving the character around, especially during conflicts. The controls have always been my gripe with the game. It's so hard to use because you hover the mouse over these arrows. You don't even click them, just move the mouse over them. It's frustrating to use, and it always feels like a balancing act trying to use these. I like to keep my eyes on the game window, and trying to watch the action and move around is something that I've always struggled with. I mean, I get it. The Macintosh was a big deal back then because of the mouse, and everyone wanted to take advantage of it. But in my opinion, here, it just feels clumsy. But this movement was remedied in a later 1993 release, where you were actually able to use the keyboard for most everything. This 1993 release was very rare at the time, as it was to be distributed by the Orchard Group, who ended up going out of business. If you're playing this on vintage hardware, the 1993 release is the way to go. It's free, you can use the keyboard, and it's compatible with all 68K machines, running up to System 7. The graphics in this game were pretty good for its time. It's easy to understand what most of the things are in this game, though personally I think some of it could have been a little more detailed. For instance, the trees look great. Full of details, you can make out the bark and the apples. You can tell that this is an apple tree. Whereas just a few feet away is some sort of building structure that I have no idea what this is. Another example of this is this building where you meet the wizard. What is this building supposed to be, and why do these white dots teleport me away? There was also an updated color version of Cap'n Magneto released in 2005, and the game was carbonized to work natively in OS X of the era. This color version is much more pleasing to the eyes, and honestly, I kinda like the look of this version more than the original. It does have a major problem though, which I'll talk about in a minute. As for the sound, this game does not use digitized sound effects. This was too early for that, as that didn't show up so much until after 1986, and this came out in '85. That being said, the sound effects that it does have are pretty good and fit the situations well. Things like the tornado, the fighting, the talking, and the Z-gate are all very memorable sound effects that I don't think I'll ever forget. If you want to play this game today, the best way is by using real hardware. Any of the compact Macs will play this no problem, even the 128K. But the Macintosh speech synthesis will only work on a Mac 512K on up, and only on Macs with a 68,000 CPU. As far as emulation, well, I've only had a little luck. Mini VMac works for a while, but after playing for about 15 minutes or so, the screen starts glitching, and it's unplayable. A restart will fix this issue for another 15 minutes or so. The color versions seem to work better. Al even made a special version for the Basilisk 2 emulator. But unfortunately, these color versions are all limited shareware versions, where you can't get to the island, which is a crucial place in this game, and thus you cannot beat it. This game used Kaji for its registration system, and after Kaji went out of business, it left this game unbeatable if you didn't register it while you could. Man, I want to play the color version. We should start a petition to see if Mr. Evans will release this game. Come on, Al. Give us the cereal. The Captain shouldn't die like this. It's going on 40 years now. Set the Captain free. Another thing worth mentioning with this game are the memorable and quite humorous shareware ads. This game originally had a bunch of nag screens that would pop up every so often and show these ads. There were several of these, each featuring designs asking you to mail in $20. I've always loved this game. I grew up with it. In fact, I wrote a letter to Al Evans back in probably 1994 or 1995. I would have just finished 4th grade at the time, 12 years old, so the letter was probably both illegible and embarrassing. But if I recall correctly, I had asked him about how the game was made and how to get started making my own games. To my surprise, he actually wrote back to me and was excited for the feedback and shared some tips with me to get started. That blew my mind back then because I mostly wrote letters to the bigger game companies like Nintendo and never got such a personal response. So yeah, that's cool. So this is Cap'n Magneto, a very well-made action-adventure game for the earliest of Macintosh computers. If you're able to look past the lack of animated graphics or digitized sounds, I truly believe there's still a lot of fun to be had with this game. It was a well-known game to early Mac gamers, for good reason. There was nothing quite like this game back then, and coming back to it today, this has been an incredibly enjoyable episode of classic Mac games to make. Even all these years later, I can still get lost in the world of Cap'n Magneto. Hey guys, thank you for your time today and for watching my video this far. If you enjoyed it, remember to leave a like on this video. If you're new, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you guys soon with a new video. Goodbye.